y muchas gracias a Rob que nos pudo acompañar y extender su estadía para estar hoy día. Él tenía un vuelo que tomar ahora y bueno, muy gentilmente para estar con nosotros lo pospuso. Entonces, para no quitarle tiempo, quería partir con su presentación. Robert Hutchinson es arquitecto, artista y docente, fundador de Robert Hutchinson Architecture, oficina con sede en Seattle. Desde su creación en el 2013, la oficina ha explorado los límites de la arquitectura a través de la práctica que combina proyectos construidos, investigaciones teóricas, instalaciones y trabajo artístico, entendiendo la arquitectura como un campo capaz de vincular dimensiones pragmáticas y conceptuales desde aproximaciones experimentales. Paralelamente a su práctica, Hutchinson ha desarrollado una destacada trayectoria académica. Actualmente es Affiliate Associate Professor en la University of Washington, ha enseñado recientemente en Cornell University y a partir de agosto de este año se incorpora a Tulane University en Nueva Orleans. Durante los últimos 15 años ha dirigido un reconocido taller internacional de verano en la Ciudad de México, instancia que ha reunido estudiantes y profesores de distintas escuelas para explorar el dibujo, la observación y la experiencia directa de la ciudad como herramienta de aprendizaje. Su proyecto ha sido reconocido internacionalmente con distinciones como el Rome Prize en Arquitectura en la American Academy in Rome, el Emerging Voices Award de The Architectural League en Nueva York y The Creative Art Fellowship otorgadas por la Japan-US Friendship Commission y el National Endowment for the Arts. Más recientemente ha desarrollado residencias de investigación y creación en instituciones como McDowell y Lockhaven. Entre sus publicaciones destaca Memory Houses, una investigación que explora las relaciones entre memoria, representación y espacio, condensando muchas de las preocupaciones que atraviesan su trabajo como arquitecto, artista y docente. Nos alegra mucho recibirlo hoy día en la Facultad de Arquitectura y Urbanismo de la Universidad de Chile para poder compartir una práctica que ha contribuido a expandir el campo disciplinar de la arquitectura a través del proyecto, el dibujo y la enseñanza. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it too loud? Is it good? It's perfect? Okay. Thank you, Guillermo, especially for the incredible hospitality that you've shown me, and Kata as well. Been an incredible few days here for my wife, Mary, and I. And thanks for the invitation to talk here. Glad that we were able to make this work, and given that yesterday things were sounding a little crazy, so thank you. I always start my talk with two slides. The first one is my studio. This is our very, very small 43 square meters studio behind our house, my wife Mary, who's here as well. Our house, of course, in the background. Mary is a graphic designer. She has her own studio in the lower part of the house, across from my architecture studio. And so we have this very, very, I think a little bit unusual for Seattle is we're very, very sort of home-based, if you will. We never drive anywhere almost. My commute is 15 seconds. If it's raining, maybe 10 seconds. And then I have this amazing group of small group of staff. Many of them have been with me since I started my firm in 2013. And I always introduce my firm this way because, as many of you know, architecture is a collaborative effort, even though my name is on the door, if you will. It's these people who help make all this happen. So I always introduce them at the beginning. For the talk, I called this talk Unbuilt, with un in parentheses, because especially in the last few years, I've become very interested in architecture, in a way of thinking about architecture that's not just about building, but about drawing and the process of getting to a building. And I've started really thinking about what I do as an architect is that process. Of course, many times with the goal of building, but sometimes not with the goal of building, which I'll explain in a little bit towards the end or the second half of the talk. And I've also started to categorize our work in not unconventional ways, perhaps. Other firms also think of their work this way, but Of course, we're architects. The majority of work that we do is building, and that's how we make money. That's how I pay my staff. That's how I pay myself and our family. But then we have these two other important aspects of our practice, what we call more the research-based practice, which is very intentionally not about building, and then this sort of interesting, strange place in between of installation, which is a very temporary thing, which sometimes might involve actually building, but in some other cases, unbuilding, which I'll also explain in a little bit. To introduce just quickly a few of our architectural projects or our built projects, we as a small firm, we tend to do a lot of smaller works. Most of our projects are either residential, perhaps 50% of our projects are houses or remodels, residential remodels or additions. But in the last 10 years, we've been doing more commercial work and have been trying to get into public work. But in the United States, and especially in Seattle, it's very difficult if you're a small firm to get into public work. It is very difficult to do housing, both things which we're starting to try to get into, which unfortunately I won't be able to talk about tonight or today. To introduce just very quickly a house that we recently completed in Seattle, which I think is a good example of what we're interested in doing with our work. I think in his introduction, Guillermo sort of introduced our firm in the way that we talk about it, which is we're very interested in a pragmatic way of thinking, but always using the qualities of light and I would say a spatial narrative, a way of drawing people through a building is very important to us. And those are always driving things through the notion of economy. So all of our work is always trying to do as little as we can, or as much as we can with as little resources as possible. This is a 50 square meter addition to a 50 square meter, well, maybe 80 square meter house in Seattle. You're looking at the back of the new addition. And in this case, even though the new addition, which as you can see in the floor plan, this is the original house, we call this the telescope addition because we're simply adding another gable addition that sort of nests into the original gable. But the whole idea of this addition is to take what's a rather small house and connect it to the backyard through this very, very long space. So basically doubling the length of the existing living and kitchen space through a stair down into a larger, higher space that diagonally connects the house at the ground level to the backyard. And for us, always the section is of extreme importance, and when we're designing, we're always developing the project through the section, and even though it's only a 10 meter, maybe 12 meter long house, that section can change itself every single time and give you a different spatial experience. The existing house had a series of these arches. This is actually a new arch, but the doorways had these arches. It's an early 1900s Seattle bungalow. And so we picked up on that idea of the arch, created a new arch as a threshold between the kitchen and the new addition, which you're seeing here from inside the new addition. So looking back through that threshold into the original house, using a sort of cascading stair to draw you down into the lower level, and then carrying that arch throughout. So this aperture, this way of drawing light in the morning is very important to the house. And then always thinking about, of course, how we create the apertures in the building itself to relate to the outside. We build pretty much exclusively in wood. I know Chile also uses a lot of wood, but in Seattle and in the US in general, unless you have a good budget, it's very difficult to build in concrete other than the foundations. Even steel is expensive, so we're always working in wood. This is being a classic example. And this is the backyard with our amazing clients enjoying their backyard from the covered deck. A project that's very important to us is the rain harvest home that we built in Mexico in 2001, which was a collaboration with one of my best friends, well, my best friend, Javier Sanchez, amazing architect out of Mexico City. He and I have known each other since 2006. Our families have kids of the same age, and we've just over the years become very, very good friends. He comes to Seattle all the time. We've collaborated together on a number of projects. But Javier, this is originally Javier's project, and he ended up inviting me to collaborate with him on it, which is, I would say, one of the nicest gifts that an architect friend can give you. The site is a very high, well, pretty high site in the mountains west of Mexico City. It's about, I would say 2,500 meters maybe. So here from the site, you're looking towards Mexico City at the Volcan Toluca. And it's this amazing, beautiful site that, as Mexico, as many of you probably know, has a very distinct wet season and a very distinct dry season. So 6 months out of the year, you get a lot of rain every day. And then for 6 months of the year, you have really almost no rain. And so Javier invited me to this project. And as we started talking about the project, he was in a little bit of a change of lifestyle. He was becoming healthier and running. He and his whole family are vegans. And this connection to the land became really important to him. And as we started talking about this project, we realized that there's an opportunity to really try to explore this building as something that is completely off the grid. It's in a reserve where many other houses now have been built by some amazing architects like Mauricio Rocha, Gabriela Carrillo. Many awesome architects have been building some projects here. And the nice thing about the reserve is that they collect the water. They require the houses to collect water and store them in communal reservoirs. And the idea is that the reservoirs then, during the dry season, become the way that you can get your rain or your water. They don't have any wells going into the earth. Everything is collected off of or from rainwater. But for Javier, he wanted to experiment and try to see if we could have on this property a reservoir that was dedicated to the property, with the idea of trying to live completely off of rainwater that we're collecting on our site. And that rainwater then in the rainy season overflows and goes off to the other reservoirs. Very quickly, we developed a program idea. I mean, it's basically a house, a retreat. But we started thinking that it would be interesting to, instead of putting everything into one larger building, that we create a series of 3 buildings, more of a cabin, and then conceptually connected to the rain bathwater or bathhouse, and then a studio. And so pretty early on in the design process, we became interested in this trio of buildings. This is a final isometric of the building that explains how all this stuff works. There's the idea of 3 separate buildings that collect rainwater, and all the rainwater on the site, if it doesn't go into the earth, then it collects and follows the trails to the reservoir. The reservoir fills up, and when there's so much rain, that reservoir continues off to the communal reservoirs. And then from there, the rainwater is treated underground in this treatment room for potable water. So when you're there, you drink the water from the reservoir. And then all of the sewage is actually treated on site as well. So he has a black water system that takes the sewage and then treats that to gray water, which is used for agriculture. So they grow all of their food on this site. And it's become a really interesting project to go back to, because it's what we've realized is that to make this system work, you have to use it. Like, you actually have to shit and piss, and like, it has to be this system. And the other interesting thing that we've started to really understand is the demand of agriculture. To grow these crops and grow all these, have this garden, takes approximately 60% of the water that we're collecting, which was something that we never really thought about, that our agriculture is so intensive in the water that it requires. So it's been an interesting project. We're also, of course, we have a solar array, so everything, basically with the sewage and the potable water or the rainwater and the solar, it's completely off the grid, essentially. Which is not the first building to do this, of course, but for us, it's our first building to do this, and we've been learning a lot. And it's been a way of thinking of how we move forward as architects with the work that we're doing. To talk about the house, it's a very, very large, broad roof. It's about 300-meter roof area with a very small sort of contained space. It actually gets very cold at night, especially at this altitude. But there's no heat except for the fireplace outside. So at night, all you can do is sit here and drink wine and talk and have a beautiful fire, and then you go into the bedrooms and sleep. But there's no heat at all. But the idea is that during the daytime, it's this amazing climate. All these doors open up, and the whole, as you can see from the drawings, the conceptual idea is that when these doors open up, the entire house feels like it's one outdoor pavilion. And we thought a lot about the sun. So north is actually down, so we're getting our sunlight from the south, from the top. And typically, in the beginning of the project, we had the plan flipped because we wanted all this public space to be facing to the south. But the views and the relationship to the site was much nicer to the north. So we flipped it, put the bedrooms to the south, and then we have this very, very large skylight up above that brings in southern light that you'll see in the photographs. But with such a broad, deep roof, the idea of these three skylights as bringing in sunlight became sort of the motif of the project. So one of the funny things about this project is when Javier asked me to co-design this with him, I was so excited I would finally be able to do either a masonry or a brick building or a stone building or a concrete building. And then he said, no, I really want to do a wood building. And in Mexico, they don't build in wood much, and they don't have a culture of, especially recently, or more like in the last few hundred years, they don't have a culture of actually building with wood. But he really wanted to do a building that was low in carbon footprint, and he knew that I knew how to do a wood building. So we ended up doing all the construction documents in Seattle through my firm, and all the engineering actually was done in Seattle. So it's a very, very simple wood building, which you can see here in the section. This is looking towards the volcano with north to the left, and as you can see, the really big skylight is facing to the south, with the idea that in the wintertime we're getting that natural light or the direct sunlight coming into the dining space. Just some quick photographs right after it was completed. All of the roofs are green roofs that then again collect the water and then channel it down into the reservoir. This courtyard space, if you will, is all about trying to really make this patio space feel even more part of the outside. And then this is that view looking to the west in the kitchen dining space where you're seeing that sunlight, the south sunlight coming down into the dining space. So here's all three buildings. This is looking to the east towards a volcano, the studio in the background, and this is the bathhouse, which for us became an interesting design problem. We thought of all three of these buildings as related to each other as sort of pavilions. Of course, once we took this idea of the bathhouse and separated it from the house, because we wanted you to walk through the plantings and the site to get to this more temple to water, if you will. We started thinking about some references, obvious references being Lou Kahn's Trenton Bath Works, with its very rigorous cruciform plan, but with the idea that there's served spaces that surround an opening to the sky. And so our original schemes actually were very much, maybe too much, referential to Lou Kahn's original building. But just before we started designing, I was in Rome as a Rome Prize Fellow at the Academy, and this amazing building by Bramante, the Tempietto, was half a block or a block from the Academy, which I didn't know until I got there, that it was like, so I would go there every week, and Javier came for a week or two, and we visited this together, and we realized maybe we could overlap Lou Kahn's building with the Tempietto. And so that's what you see in the floor plan, with the idea that you have the served spaces. I don't have my glasses on, but this is the sauna. Actually, no, this is the thermae. This is the sauna, the thermae, which you step down into a hot bath, a steam shower space, and a changing room. But the idea is that you have all these 4 different ways of entering into this building, but you have to enter into the center of the building to then get to each of the spaces. And the center is, of course, the metaphorical center of the whole site, the cold plunge, which is open to the sky. Once again, a wood building, although we used a lot of Mexican tiles and stone, volcanic stone from the area. One of the important things for this building for us was that we didn't want any windows in any of these 4 spaces. So all 4 spaces have the skylight, similar to the house, that then brings light in from above. Again, some quick photos. This is the Recinto tile in the thermae, and bringing light in from above. And then when it rains, it really, really rains. This is a photo by Javier. One of the beautiful things is that we designed, well, we thought a lot about how the water comes in. So there's a gutter here with these little scuppers that let the rain come down. But then after the rain has gone, the floor is actually sloped up to the high point here, so you end up with this whole disk of water that fills the whole space. And then when it gets to this point, it then overflows to the site and goes to the reservoir. So rather than talking more about this, I love showing these photographs by the amazing photographer Hélène Benet. She's someone who I actually did a workshop with and got to know in 2022, I believe, or 23, and was able to bring her to Mexico for a workshop in Guadalajara. And she came down and stayed a week at the site. And because Hélène, I don't know if people know Hélène Benet, but she's a very, very important photographer who is still only using analog film. She doesn't use any digital. And so she needs the time to spend at a site, and so she ended up being here for a whole week to photograph the site. And so I like to just scroll through and show some of the photographs that she's done for us. They're really quite beautiful. They're much nicer when you see them as prints. But Hélène has this ability, I think, to really. She was there for the first 2 days. She didn't use her camera. She just walked around and wanted to understand the quality of light. For her, it's all about the light, but also the relationship of the building to the site. And what we really appreciate about, it's always good to bring an amazing photographer to view your work, because it allows you to look at your work, I think, in a fresh way. And for us, it became a realization that for us, the architecture is actually secondary in some ways, that the architecture is just there in a dance with the site, and it's not about the architecture as being this thing that's standing out, but rather really trying to be a part of the site. And so a lot of the photographs she took for us is of the site. It's not of the building. which I think is really beautiful, but it's about the atmosphere, it's about the textures. I love how she frames, this is her slideshow that she sent us when she first gave us the first round of photographs, and I love how she paired this square aperture with another image of the site itself. This is a studio, which I'm not going to talk about. The interior of the house is of all three buildings, well, the studio and the house is all plywood. It's very economical, as economical as we could make this building. I really love this photograph because it's all about darkness. When you're in these buildings, they're actually quite dark. Because the siding is all stained black, and so even inside the kitchen area, the siding is black, and so you get this moment of really framing the landscape. I think this is one of my favorite photos, just the way especially in the rainy season, the site just completely takes over and everything just starts to disappear into the site. This is at dusk, right after the sun has gone down. Very quickly, I just wanted to show this because I'm excited to see this house that's been under construction for a year and a half to 2 years now. This is a house that we're building in La Plata, Argentina. So Mary and I are going there this afternoon to be in Buenos Aires for a few days, and I'm meeting my client to go see the construction. And finally, I get to build a brick house. So this is a client who we did a house remodel in Seattle. She's originally from La Plata. Her and her husband are high school sweethearts. And they still have family in La Plata, and so they wanted a place to go back to visit family, but she's actually a very intensive yoga teacher. And so one of the things we did in Seattle is we designed a yoga studio for her house where she has classes. So she wanted to use this as a retreat for people to come to do yoga for like a week long. So it's basically like a small retreat for yoga. And this is sort of a curious site in really not the nicest sort of development of houses that are starting to be built. There's one right next door that's not a very nice house. So early on, the idea was to do an enclosed courtyard patio project out of brick because that was the most economical way of building. With that patio and the living spaces opening out to the west to a forest. There's a natural reserve just to the west. Very, very simple floor plan that is essentially a U-shaped brick box with the sleeping spaces set up to the north, and then a large patio with the original idea was the swimming pool was in the patio. It's since moved over here. But the idea is that this is the living spaces looking out to the forest, and then the yoga studio is actually here that you pass by to get into the building. So these are just renderings from a little while ago. The building's changed a little bit, but not much. And then these are recent photographs in construction that were sent to us on the left and the rendering on the right. A black brick with a screen. This is the space between the bedrooms and the brick wall. So they have their own private patio with the yoga studio volume floating above. Oops. So the second building that we designed is a house for a widow. It's intentionally situated right on the water because she loves boats. She's still alive and doing amazing. She's turning 90 in December. The chapel and the winery is here. These are the vineyards. You go down to the water, and so we designed a house for a widow. It's quite interesting designing something for someone that they didn't know you were designing for. She didn't know about this project until 2 years after, when we did the exhibition, and she actually came out to see the exhibition in Mexico City, and she was pretty emotional about the whole thing, obviously. Then we were like, well, she loves boats. Maybe we do I always wanted to design a lighthouse. So we designed a lighthouse across the river. And then because someone needs to keep the lighthouse, we had my mother taking a boat over to the lighthouse, so she needed a boathouse. Long story short, it kept going. And over 5 years, we designed 8 buildings. Different typologies. I could do a 4-hour talk on this project alone, but we don't have the time for that. But basically, we created that process as a way to really explore all of these buildings, and then that became a way of thinking about exhibition, and then it turned into the book, Memory Houses, that we published in 2019 through Arquitectura. And this is when I started really understanding the relevance of some of the things that I had been looking at in grad school that I had not looked at for a long time ago. This incredible book called Condemned Building has always been very influential for me, by Douglas Darden, an incredible architect who never built anything, but did these beautiful, beautiful drawings. And for me, Douglas Darden's work, that book is so important because of this idea of narrative, personal narrative. And I realized that his book is actually what influenced Memory Houses from the start, even though at the time I wasn't making that connection. Another person really important to me is Lebbeus Woods. And I started realizing all these people were architects who were from the generation that they called the paper architects. And they were proposing things that maybe had no expectation to be built, but they were taking it to a point where you could realize it could be built. And that became very interesting to me, and Memory Houses incorporated that. Memory Houses was all about, none of these buildings are going to be built, but we want people to start to understand them as architecture. And how do we do that as architects? It's through drawing and through models, as a way to try to get people to inhabit an architecture that won't exist. Raymond Abraham also has been very important to me, especially his writing. His drawings are really incredible, but I don't understand some of his projects very, very well. But I really like how he talks about the importance of what we do as architects, and that most of us don't build. That architects, especially now, we don't build, we envision what could hopefully be built. And I think for me, that's become a really important distinction, and has allowed me to maybe not get into this mode of always being concerned about building something. And sometimes it's okay for a project to not necessarily have that expectation. So with that, the last project that I'll present, which has been the last 8 years of conceptually working in the studio. It's incorporated all of my staff. It's been a very, very long project. It's called Memory Landscapes. And this started up around the time Memory Houses was being completed. I went to Japan for 2 weeks as a resident with some other professionals to study earthquake resiliency, because Seattle, a lot of people don't know it, but similar to Chile, Seattle is actually a very seismic area that the problem is we don't get earthquakes that often, but scientists in the last 20 years have realized that we will get an earthquake every 300 to 500 years. That is the same size as the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in 2011. Because we have a huge fault 10 miles off the coastline, and when it goes, we'll get a magnitude 9 earthquake and a 60-foot tsunami wave. A lot of people don't know that. So, and we're at 300 years since the last one. And when they look at the pattern through soil samples, every 300 to 500 years we get this event. So Seattle is not ready at all for this event. And there were two places that we were given money, and the idea is that we could go anywhere we wanted to. There were two places that we thought we should go to learn more about earthquakes and tsunami: Japan and Chile. I wanted to go to Chile because I had not gone to Japan, or I had not been to Chile before, but my three other partners that were selected for this, they had never been to Japan before. And they were like, no, we want to go to Japan. So we went to Japan for 2 weeks to meet people, to talk about more about earthquake resiliency for urban conditions, to bring lessons back to Seattle. But while we were there, we were taken out in Sendai, we were taken out to the ocean, and we climbed up on top of this tsunami wall. And I was completely astounded at the scale of this. Not so much the height of it, but the continual condition of all of this concrete that they had built since the 2011 tsunami. And so when I got home, what I do very well is if I get something that I'm interested in, then I just start looking into it more. I went through, just searching the web and started finding all these crazy photographs of concrete tsunami wall infrastructure that's been built in Japan since the 2011 event. So these are just photographs that I found online, specifically from an article, one article from The Guardian, with these very surreal moments of, oh, well, we can still give them a view of the ocean. And for me, I was starting to realize, wow, this is just a crazy condition where they're trying to prepare for another event. So the intention is a good one. They're trying to save people because, for that event, 20,000 people died from 2011. But at what cost? The cost of separating people from the very thing that these communities are there for. They're all fishing villages and towns. So this separation of the connection to the ocean is that connection is severed, but also the carbon condition of all of this concrete. This is the largest construction project in the history of Japan. And then even the fisheries and the shellfish, all of the, where the rivers come into the ocean, that condition is being damaged because of all of this. So I became very interested in it to the point where I started thinking that this should be a project, and I applied for funding and a fellowship. I got a second Japan fellowship in 2023. Just to clarify, if people don't know Japan that well, the 4 islands of Japan, with Honshu being the main largest one, and Tohoku region is at the northern end of Honshu. So if you zoom in on Tohoku, this whole coastline is what was completely taken out by the 2011 event. So I got this amazing fellowship, and then after I got through with fellowship, to go to Japan to study this for 4 months, right after I received the notification and I was doing research, I realized that the government had just completed a trail, 1,000 kilometer long trail along the entirety of the coastline where this tsunami came through. And I realized that maybe I should try to just walk the coastline as part of my fellowship. They have these amazing maps that tell you, hey, when you get to the cow field, it's okay to open the gate and go through the field, like that level of detail, because it's the Japanese, everything is figured out. And so I went, before I went on my walk, I decided I would try to walk the entire coastline, but before I went, I walked it in Google Maps. And so what became very interesting is I started mapping all of the walls through Google Maps for a project that I thought was still under construction. And so you're seeing here me mapping them and then using Street View to understand the before and after condition. So, in Google Maps, you're always looking in the same way. This is just after what's interesting is they had no Google Maps views before the tsunami. They hadn't had anyone go through. So all of the images, the earliest images they have are just after the tsunami had taken everything out. So here you are looking in at one of the towns. This is a good landmark to look at. And then this is the aftermath. And it became quite interesting. Here's an interesting one. This became one of our sites to work on. 2 walls, a railroad, and then the tsunami wall. Both of them basically tsunami walls, with a strange space in between, before and after. You get the idea. Some of them, they had tsunami walls already in place. This is one that was able to survive the tsunami. And so because they want them higher, they just would add on top of them. So I used this as a way to start understanding what I was going to start or plan to see, and then I used a series of conceptual drawings to start understanding the different types of walls. A lot of them are earth-bermed walls, but all these conceptual drawings are always using people as a scale figure to understand the scale of these. The highest walls are 16 meters tall. And then I went on my walk. This is just a slideshow of some of the photographs. I was lucky, again, to have Hélène Benet as a sort of workshop teacher for a week before I went on this walk. And she was so instrumental in helping me think about how this project might, or the photography might relate to the project. A lot of my photographs, you're looking down because I'm actually able to walk on top of some of the walls. Here, looking at a relatively new cemetery after the tsunami. This curious relationship between nature and the infrastructure. Of course, the aftermath, that's still there. And it was a tough walk. It's very much a recovering landscape, a place that in some cases is very sad still, because so many people lost so much. This is actually a boat on the land side of the wall, so the ocean is on the other side. These stairs are not for people to get over the wall to get to the ocean. It's for people from the fishing boats to get back to safe ground after an earthquake. Some of the photographs, it feels like I took Photoshop and just put a wall into the landscape. And I started thinking about how there's actually a violence to these walls that is uncomfortable, but also in some cases there's a beauty, like a geometric beauty, an architectural beauty, which is quite an interesting thing to grapple with, of what does beauty mean in this crazy place? Of course, always a connection and relationship to the ocean. Oops. I like this photograph because it's like people trying to hold something back. And then really this amazing thing that happens when you go on a long walk with a backpack and stay in people's houses. You meet all these incredible people. Just a few people that I've gone back to since, and I stay in touch with. This is a son and his mother who run Minshuku, which is like a small inn. Just amazing family who I end up going back and interviewing. So their interview is actually in my book. And it's quite a nice, it's just a conversation about their family and their connection to this place. But the son is actually a sushi chef. This is the amazing sashimi dinner that he made for me. And you know, they can't speak a word of English. I can't speak any Japanese, so we're using Google Translate. But he took the time to translate every single thing and put these little post-it notes in my meal. I thought it was really beautiful. This amazing woman who lost everything, but rebuilt her house and opens it to visitors. This is a Shinto shrine priest who was in a shrine in the town. I was walking around at the end of the day, and there's this priest who's in his clothing, and he's doing the bells and stuff, and he's closing everything up. And so I tried to stay away from him so I wasn't interrupting him. And then I went to a bar, and he came in and sat down next to me, and I said, hello. He said, you don't remember me, do you? I said, oh, I'm sorry, have we met? He said, well, I'm the Shinto priest that you just saw 2 hours ago. And he came in, he's like perfectly, beautifully dressed. And so he got a glass of wine, and this is him toasting me. Really incredible couple who run an izakaya. This is the person who I still stay in touch with the most. He lost his house, and his izakaya lost 100 neighbors, and he ended up giving me his whole day the next day and took me around his town to show me everything that no longer exists. When you're in the izakaya, you get to meet fun people. Naoya Hatakeyama is a really important person to me. If you know anything about photography from Japan, he's one of the most important photographers. He comes from this same town, Rikuzen Takata. His mother drowned in the tsunami. His childhood home is just to the right, or where it used to be. And he's been going back since the tsunami with his camera and photographing the town that he used to, or what he remembers. So there's this really heavy condition, but also something really beautiful. How am I doing time-wise? I'm okay? Maybe 5 more minutes? Yeah. So all of that stuff is happening, and I started thinking about these walls, and originally I thought that this could be a design project to rethink the way infrastructure could be built in this condition. But once I got there, all of the infrastructure was actually already built. And a really interesting thing is I kept trying to ask people what they thought about this infrastructure. What do you think about this new concrete wall that removes your view of the ocean? And trying to be open about this, like I had my own thoughts about what this is, but who am I to say that? I really wanted to hear, do they feel safer? And I would never get an answer. And what I realized is, and part of it is I think the cultural way that the Japanese think, is they were like, that, why would we can't answer that question because it's already here. So it doesn't matter what we think. I won't tell you what I think about this because it is there and I'm accepting it. So I decided, rather than trying to rethink this infrastructure, I thought there would be an interesting way to think about how do you confront this infrastructure as an opportunity. And that's what all these sketches are, where we started talking about, how do we, because what's interesting about these walls is they remove something really, really important from all of these communities, and that's public space and the connection between land and sea. And in this place of loss, that connection is really, really important because so many people lost their loved ones and never found them. So to put this wall in place where they can't have that connection between land and ocean is a problem. That's what I came to realize through not just me thinking about this, but through a number of good friends who are Japanese who sort of brought this to my realization. So this project became a way of trying to return this connection between community and people and the ocean, but also this way of trying to understand and connect, of course, land and sea, people and ocean, but also life and death. So in a strange way, it came back to memory houses in this way of trying to confront the relationship between life and death. The first project, and I'm only going to show 2 of the 5 projects that we did. 3 of them are going to be in our book. The first one is this incredible, beautiful landscape with the largest wall that is on the coast. This is a 16-meter tall wall. And it's one of the few that actually is sort of interestingly one that you can walk across, but no one would walk across it because it's so long and you feel so exposed. And nearby there's a cenotaph, but not a designed one, and it's sort of like something that was put up by the government. It wasn't something that connected with the community. A cenotaph is a memorial to people whose bodies lie elsewhere. And so the idea of a cenotaph seemed really important in this landscape. And in this scheme, we became interested in, this is an earth-bermed concrete wall, so it's all earth that they cover over with concrete. And what we decided to do is, this is a plan section elevation drawing where there's this idea of a structure that is placed into this wall that provides 2 ways of crossing through this landscape. One where you're elevated above this excavation that allows you to still have a connection to the land and the sea, or an option to actually come down into the wall and only have a relationship to the sky. And then this Japanese method of construction called hanegi, where they're taking cedar members and they're stacking them, became a way of trying to replicate the forest that used to be here. All along the coastline, they had beautiful pine forests, and they were all completely washed away. But some of my friends would tell me when they were children, they remembered walking through the forest and the beautiful light coming through the trees. So this idea was maybe trying to replicate through architecture a feeling of that quality of light. So similar to memory houses, we're using hand drawing as a way to figure out where the scheme is going, making reference or connecting to past references. This is of ROC's amazing swimming pool where you come down into the ground, separate your people from the ocean, use the changing rooms as a transition space, or Tadawando's temple, the lily pad temple, where you go down into a space. And this notion or this idea of actually going down into something, very similar to the amazing Radic museum that I was taken to yesterday. But using that as an opportunity became really interesting for us in this project. And then using more sort of architectural drawings to help people take this crazy idea and actually start to wonder, well, maybe this is possible. And then we spent a lot of time on 3 drawings or 3 visualizations for each scheme, always from different vantage points, typically like far away, closer, and then inside. But we spent a lot of time in the studio trying to figure out a way of drawing this that somehow was trying to connect to Japanese sensibility, anime, sort of being influenced by methods, but also not being hopefully too overt for that method. So here you see the cenotaph in the distance as you're closer. also spending a lot of time trying to get the atmosphere of the place that I experienced while I was there, and then when you're down below. And then second one, sentinels. These are these two structures that perch themselves on top of the wall to guard a fishing harbor. I stayed in this amazing little minshuku, which I believe, I don't have it, at which you can no longer see the ocean from this inn. And so the idea was two structures, one facing the ocean, one facing the town. And we started thinking of them as communicators, like things that are listening, but also speaking towards the town, with the idea that in a tsunami warning, the towers become sirens to warn people in the ocean and on land. And I'm realizing, there's even this way of thinking about connecting to, the Spirited Away movies, this idea of Totoro sitting on a branch, and realizing that that's something that maybe we're channeling a little bit in Javier's house, and then taking it to an architectural drawing level, a way of actually, one of the rule sets was the concrete walls become foundations for these structures. So our rule was there's no concrete allowed for the new structures. All the new structures are wood, using Japanese methods. And then the three views, here you're standing out at sea looking back at the two towers. They also mark the point where you walk up over to make a connection to the harbor. Here you're on top of the wall. And then this is that same woman who we drew from the back. So it's very hard to take a drawing of someone or take the photograph of them waving at you and then trying to create them from the back. But we really wanted her to be in this drawing. And we're publishing this. It's going to print in hopefully a month. I'm done. This is published by Park Books. I would love to come back down and present it, but I'm very excited. It's been 8 years that we've been working on this. So just to end, again, a huge thank you to Guillermo especially, but Kata also, and the number of people that we met. But I did want to say something. I mean, I've seen some amazing buildings here, and you don't need to be told how amazing your buildings are. But this one really, I was not expecting. I saw photos of the interior space that Guillermo posted on Instagram a few months ago. I was like, what is that? That looks really interesting. But I looked it up, and it's like 2 cubes. Pretty simple scheme, it seems. And I was not prepared to enter into this space and have such a thoughtful way of taking what seems like a very simple way of thinking about 2 cubes that are nesting together, but really it just becomes this very complex spatial experience using topography and incisions. And I just wanted to say, I think this is a really incredible building. I was really floored by this moment of, the floating Jesus in the next space and using color as a way to really illuminate them. My wife, Mary, took this amazing photo of Guillermo and I inside that space. And then this moment where everything comes together is really quite remarkable. So thank you very much. I spoke too long. Thank you. No, thank you.
I would say maybe also mostly for everyone here, but mostly for our students, that sometimes you don't need like a commission to keep thinking about architecture. So that's like a great learning for all of us, I guess. So, and the thoughtful and sensitive way in which you conduct your research is also very inspiring. So thank you very much, and I look forward to read your book.
Thank you.
I had a question as well, and thank you again for the presentation, for this very broad and rich range of work. And I had a question specifically about the paper architecture that you mentioned, the one that you developed. Maybe it's too big a question to answer in a sort of short or this precise moment, but got me thinking where you said, the paper architecture from the 60s was exploring drawing as a way to push, I don't know, ways of living, but also ways of thinking architecture. And you said, but I think that now the things that I draw should be sort of constructively precise, that it should give the image that it can be built or something like that. What do you think happens, or why do you take that position towards sort of using paper architecture as a way of thinking? Why does it have to be, for you, sort of true to building?
Thank you. No, it's a good question. I'll try to answer it. I mean, for the two last projects I presented, the memory houses project, for me, it was maybe a little bit at first convincing myself that these things could actually be built, knowing that I would never build them. So as an architect, I really wanted to make sure that, and that there was an opportunity there for an exploration without being worried or concerned about building them, but bringing us to a certain point where the disbelief is no longer there, that there's actually this way of being like, wow, we figured this out, this could actually be done. And then when it became an exhibition, it became really important to me that people could inhabit the buildings, either the architects or the people that know enough about building to be able to look at them and be like, this is a crazy idea of a lighthouse, but actually you've done enough to figure out how it could be built. And that, because they're never going to be built, by knowing that they could be built, for me, it seems like it makes them real. And that was what the exhibition was about. And for us, a big thing that's been happening is, and I thought of naming the lecture today, Where is Architecture Here? ? Because we've been wondering, well, what does it mean to build a half-scale model or building of a chapel? So that it wasn't maybe completely clear, but the chapel for Luis Barragan is actually the chapel I designed originally for my father. And it just happened, we realized that if we built it at half the actual scale of the original chapel design, it fit perfectly with the condition in the studio. And so when we built it, we're like, well, it's an installation, but this is architecture, I think. And then we started wondering, well, if you have a model, is that architecture? So this question of where is architecture and when do we call it that is something that we don't have an answer for, but that's partly what we're excited about in this work. Partly because we know it will never be built. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but for the second project, the memory landscapes, one thing that's been interesting, I didn't have time to talk about it, but we are actually on a team for a vertical evacuation structure in Westport, Washington, for a tsunami, because the communities are realizing that they have 10 minutes to get to high ground, and there is no high ground. So we're actually on the team for the first large-scale tsunami structure in the US. I'm curious if you had them in Chile, but there's many of them in Japan. They're like 60-foot or 20-meter tall towers that you have to go up to the top, and then the tsunami comes through. And you have 10 minutes to get to them. And one thing that's been interesting with dealing with this with the communities is they're confronted with the fact that 90% of them are going to die if this happens. And it's very hard to talk to them about reality and even a structure that can be built to save 10% of them. And so this idea of a narrative fiction, with Ursula Le Guin, the author, talks about science fiction as actually being powerful because it allows us to confront really difficult topics, and using speculative architecture through taking it to the level of thinking that it could be built, similar to the tsunami structures or the infrastructure we're proposing, is a way of that we've been thinking about it. And I showed some of the proposals to some of the amazing people I met when I went back. And the mother and son, the mother was so excited because she's like, wow, we could have coffee. I could have a cafe at the top of this. And so I think there is a way, like it's something, we're finding it's a way of confronting really difficult topics without having to build it yet. I'm not sure if that answered the question, so. See.
I will try to be as simple as possible. I think we're constantly like getting at like we're fighting about what we can build or what we cannot. So it's not a question; it's more about a comment. I really like about memory houses and memory landscapes. How do you deal with that? With not really be building, but like just like projects in your mind, like how you fight with that, with not be building. So it's just that.
So you mean how do I confront the knowing that it won't be built? Is that the question, or?
It's because it's not a question. It's like it's an appreciation to how you can see what's not built. So it's not a question. It's like,
No, I appreciate that. I will say that we are very comfortable, as you can see, proposing things that won't be built, but taking it to a certain level. But in both conditions, in the memory houses, it's actually turned into 2 installations, one for the house for my mother, the house for a widow. We built a half-scale version of that in an installation, and a half-scale version of the chapel, which we never intended to do. So again, there's a little bit of a question, is that architecture? Because it's the half-scale, I think it is. But then again, for the memory landscapes, we got invited for this tsunami tower because of the work that we were doing in Japan. There's no other way we would have ever been asked. So in a curious way, like we didn't do it, we need to market ourselves to be part of a tsunami tower. But because we did that project and the city, the people at the city heard about the project, they invited us to be a consultant on the project that's actually going to be built. So it is sort of a funny relationship that we're not worried about it, and we just know in the end we do it because it keeps us interested. I didn't say it, but we think of all this stuff as like a feedback loop. So by doing the installations and the theoretical work and the built work, everything is like influencing and keeping things going. Because if we only did the architecture, for me personally, I don't think I would be an architect anymore. It's really difficult. I mean, I'm saying that for myself. It's very hard to be an architect always being asked to build with difficult conditions of clients and budgets and codes and all these things. It's a hard profession. And I think other people do it better than I do. But I think I'm a better architect because we do these other things which help influence that work. So.
Hello. First, thank you for the presentation. I have a really specific question because I'm having trouble with my own project. See, I see that you normally work with recent memories, like these are raising laws like the tsunami recent. Your father is also quite recent. But what about working with a memory that is already long gone? How will you build into a ruin, for example?
That's a great question. And I've actually started a third project when my friend Taiji Miyasaka, this amazing architect who's important in all the projects I've done, a really good friend. When we were finishing up the Memory Landscapes project, he said, "Rob, what's the next project? Because this is a trilogy, right?" And I didn't think of this as like a three-part project, but it was an interesting question. And this is hard to answer, but I've been interested in, the third project we're working on now currently it's called Memory Vessels. And the idea is that I'm starting to think about how we might design vessels that have a connection to memory in a longer term condition. And I wasn't prepared to talk about this, so I don't know how to explain it because it's not clear in my head yet. But when going to the museum yesterday, I've become very interested in ceramics and those amazing knots. And there's something about these things that are more objects, that are ceramics or textiles, that I think is quite interesting related to this way of thinking about a longer term memory. That's where we're trying to take this project. So we're trying to think of ways of thinking about designing architecture at a one-to-one scale that is not inhabitable, that you can't actually be inside, but like a beautiful, like there's these crazy pots for people's bones in the museum. So I'm not answering your question, other than it is something we're interested in, and it's turning into the third project. So you'll have to wait 5 to 10 more years until the third project is realized. Yeah, thank you. No, it's a really good observation, and it's something that we've talked a lot about, because I think in that sense they're horrible because they're everyday reminders of something that happened. And part of, I didn't talk about it, but one of the ideas of the project is by trying to allow them to occupy that condition as a space rather than seeing it as an object is a way to try to ingrain it more into an everyday condition that is more about acceptance and connection to the ocean rather than a constant reminder of something horrible that happened. Now, whether or not we're doing that, we'll never know, because I don't think they'll ever be built. There's no way the Japanese government will let us build those. But it's a good observation, and that's at least the idea behind what we're trying to investigate in those projects. The other thing I'll say is, again, I didn't mention this, but there's many ideas behind all of this work. But we're very interested in multi-purpose infrastructure. We think it's really important at this stage of the way we think about building is if we're going to build something, we need to really start designing these things to connect to more than one purpose. And the problem with the Japanese tsunami wall project by the government is not necessarily that it's a bunch of walls, but it was designed by engineers in 1 year as the same condition that you apply everywhere. And it should have involved 10 to 20 years of architects and engineers and sociologists and artists as a project to think about what is the way to do this. And that's the real problem there. It was done so quickly. They designed it in 1 year and they built it in 9. And it's done. It's finished. They're done. I saw one wall that was still being worked on. So, but yeah, it's a good comment, so thank you.
Great. Rob, thank you so much. It's been an amazing morning. Thank you again for your generosity to stay.
you.